You're listening to Switched On Australia, the podcast that tracks the opportunities and challenges of the renewable energy transition and electrifying everything, everywhere. Switched On is proudly brought to you by Boundless Earth. Boundless Earth uses philanthropy, investment and direct advocacy to help Australia become a global force in a decarbonised world. Switched On is also brought to you by GoodWe, the all-in-one ESA battery system safely powering Aussie homes, lowering bills and providing energy independence. Hello and welcome to Switched On Australia. I'm Anne Delaney. Thanks for joining me. Australia is in the middle of a home energy boom. More than 4 million households now have rooftop solar. Batteries are being installed at a record rate. And increasingly, our homes aren't just consuming electricity, they're generating and storing it too. And last week's federal budget reinforced just how central consumer energy resources are becoming to Australia's future energy system. Governments and energy planners are increasingly relying on households to help stabilise and decarbonise the grid. But beneath this rapid consumer energy transformation, there's a growing technical problem emerging. Many of our energy devices still can't properly communicate with each other. It's an issue known as interoperability, which basically allows our solar systems, batteries, electric vehicles, inverters, retailers, and electricity networks to all talk to each other. And that, the theory goes, enables households to get more value and choice from their energy devices. And if they can't all communicate, the fear is consumers could be locked into closed ecosystems where our battery might only work with certain apps or retailers or virtual power plants. And that could reduce our choices and make it harder to fully utilise the energy resources that we've paid for. And it's not just a consumer issue. Without common standards and better integration, managing the millions of household energy devices could become slower and more expensive. One project that's tackled some of these challenges is ARENA's Smart Connect initiative. This has been exploring how consumer energy resources integrate more effectively with the grid. To chat all things interoperability, I'm joined today by Dani Alexander, the CEO of UNSW's Energy Institute. Dani Alexander, thanks so much for joining the Switched On podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Dani, for someone who's never heard of this term interoperability before, tell me, what's the simplest way that you would explain it?
I think at a very high level, the principle here is about delivering more choice to customers as well as lowering the cost to customers. The reason I say that is because when we talk about interoperability, we're talking about having lots of different types of assets being connected in the same way. So from a customer perspective, this means that you can go out and you can buy whatever type of battery or solar system you like with any type of inverter and trust that they can be connected and you can get the value out of that asset. If we have interoperability, you should also be able to see a lowering of costs when it comes to those assets as well. It's also important to note that this is true for the other side of the equation as well, for instance, network businesses. If we are able to have interoperability of all of these assets, the networks can also benefit from that choice of different types of assets, again, solar systems, battery systems, and the inverters that connect them, and that they, with a standard approach to this, can lower the costs of integrating them into their systems.
So it's a two-way communication, so to speak.
That's right, because what we're talking about here is that we are moving towards this bidirectional flow of electricity on our grid. We're already there. We've got 4 million people or households out there with rooftop solar, and Minister Bowen told us earlier today that we've got over 300,000 home energy storage systems that were installed since the Cheaper Home Battery Scheme came in last year.
It's brilliant.
So what we're seeing is greater generation going into the grid from the customer side, and it's about like you say, making sure that that communication is working well and in a standard way so that we can all benefit from those investments.
Now, what problems are going to be created if we don't ensure that all these consumer energy devices, or assets as you call them, can talk to each other? What's going to happen?
If we don't have that interoperability, that standardization there, essentially you get the reverse. So you get less choice and you get higher costs. So from, I guess a network perspective, if you need to integrate each type of asset, you can imagine how much more time that takes. And, when you think about networks, who pays for those networks? It's us. So really, if we don't strive towards this interoperability as a principle, we're all going to pay for it in the end.
As you say, that we all may pay for it in the end in terms of, our taxes having to go towards increased network infrastructure, etc. But why does the consumer need to sort of think in that broader sense of what the networks need?
Well, I suppose, I'm hopeful that the customer doesn't need to think too much about it, in that we can trust in the processes that are being undertaken by the sector in service of driving down those costs to customers. The reason I say that is because there's been a long period of work that's already been undertaken, for instance, most recently through what's called the Smart Connect initiative that's funded by the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, to drive forward this important issue of interoperability. What it should look like from the customer side is invisible. It should work. It should be seamless, and you should be able to go out and choose whatever system you want and trust that it's going to work in the same way. If you're able to show this interoperability, I suppose, in practice, this invisible
Communication, I suppose.
communication mechanism working well, what that means as well is that we'll also hopefully see that more products will become available to customers to get more value out of their assets.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have that additional functionality, your solar system may and battery system particularly working together may not be able to participate in schemes that could offer you revenue streams. You also may find that there'll be greater curtailment. We call this curtailment of your solar generation. Essentially, you won't be able to generate as much as you could if there was an ability to just stop you generating a little bit. They might stop you generating a lot.
Because essentially at the moment we do have a bit of a problem, because some manufacturers of batteries, for instance, they are locking customers into their own ecosystems, aren't they? They're not enabling them to talk to all retailers, all inverters. And that's the issue that it comes down to when you talk about choice, isn't it?
I think where we have the opportunity to have competition for products, that's a really positive thing. It allows greater choice, so people can decide what type of offerings that suit them best. I'm not saying that everyone wants to have an app and look at it all the time to completely optimize their energy use against the wholesale price of electricity, but so I think there is an interest from customers to get the most value out of their assets in different ways. So, as you say, the more that we can promote that choice and not lock in customers to certain offers or certain products by certain providers, that's a positive thing.
So what's it going to take, Dani?
I think it's going to take a little bit more time. What we've been looking at for some time is the progress that we're making to the maturity of what we would call maybe integration of consumer energy resources, or in some cases we talk about this as orchestration. We've been on this path for a long time, over 10 years, to trust that this is a mainstream option for essentially customer-owned assets like solar and batteries, but also potentially other assets, to participate in the market more actively, or provide support services to the networks to drive down the cost for everyone. The assessment that I've been doing for a project over in Western Australia over several years, previously with a project called Project Symphony, now with Project Jupiter, suggests that we're getting quite close to what we'd call technology maturity. The next step, of course, is to continue with these efforts in the sector, collaborating across the entire value chain, including networks, retailers, the market operator, and others, to continue to get to that technology maturity, but also consider other factors that relate to market maturity. And this is where we're talking about standards development and policies and regulations.
Right, all the really hard stuff.
It's all complex, of course, but it's worthwhile. And at the end of the process, and we are getting closer to mainstreaming this now, we would hope to see that we'll be then on a level playing field where your small scale systems could be a viable alternative to large, what we'd call traditional network side big infrastructure options that we've seen in the past. And that's a fantastic thing.
And which we've seen in terms of some of the development as some of those projects slow down, whereas it's the consumer resources which are really exploding, aren't they?
You're so right. This is where we continue to outstrip expectation. I go back to those 4 million households that have got rooftop solar that we never saw in the forecasts. And, cheaper home battery schemes has outstripped expectations. That's probably an understatement. But I think it shows, just as you say, that if we were to lean into those areas of the energy transformation that have been most successful, we would look at the small side.
When you mentioned Project Jupiter, you said that we're at technology maturity, but there are these other factors in relation to standards and regulations. The other thing, though, that we have, and it's a really significant issue, and that is that a lot of people with these consumer energy resources don't want to be part of an orchestrated scheme. They don't want to be part of a virtual power plant because they don't trust the industry. They don't trust the retailers are going to do the right thing. They don't trust that they're going to have their car charged when they need it charged. A lot of people are getting these resources because they want independence and resilience. So even if we do get the technological maturity, the standards, and some of those other factors that you're talking about, how do we deal with this issue of trust?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because the work that I'm doing in Project Jupiter is looking at the entire system that we need to change if we're going to mainstream what I would term a consumer-led energy transformation. Yes, we have stages that relate to interoperability, say integration, operation, orchestration. But actually, there are other stages along this life cycle, I would call it, of orchestration or consumer-led resources that include things like customer engagement and developing a very strong value proposition for the people who own these assets. Those are independent stages that have significant work in that project that's underway.
And when you say give people a real value proposition, you're basically talking about giving people a financial return or whatever in order to be able to to participate in some of these schemes. It's like do the right thing by the customer, isn't it?
And it is understanding what customers want as well. I know it seems a bit naff to say it in that way, but in fact, Curtin University is doing an important social science research piece as part of the project to really understand customer sentiment. What is it that people want when they buy these assets, and how can we meet them where they are so that the system can benefit from these assets as much as possible as well?
Is it different for different households? Is the in terms of what customers want? I'm presuming it's going to be slightly different, or is it easy to actually categorise? The people who have got a lot of these consumer energy resources. Is it possible to categorise in any themes there?
You're absolutely right that and it probably doesn't come as a surprise that there's lots of different people and those people want different things. I do think that those financial benefits are really important. That continues to come through a lot of the social science that has been done over the decades and even before that. Um, but what that actually looks like for customers can actually be a little bit different. So when we consider financial benefits, some people consider financial benefits in terms of additional revenue, like making the most out of their assets. But for other people, that financial benefit might actually come from a security mindset, protecting, your financial security by perhaps buying a battery so that you're able to build resilience. And it can also go beyond financial factors, particularly when it comes to storage. What we're seeing in some of the social science is that, in fact, people are investing in those assets, not necessarily because of how much money they can make from it, but actually can they become more independent from the grid so that they can be resilient to maybe disturbances or reliability concerns that they might have about electricity, whether that's true based on the evidence or not.
Okay, let's take a short break and we'll be back right after this message from one of our sponsors.
G'day, Alex Carey here, proud ambassador for GoodWe. The GoodWe ESA 3060 all-in-one commercial solution is available now from GoodWe wholesalers. With a massive 50 kilowatt hours of the battery eligible for the federal rebate, it's the perfect solution for small businesses. The commercial energy storage range from GoodWe is growing, with more models launching soon. Visit goodwe.com.au for more information or contact the local GoodWe team.
My guest today is Dani Alexander, the CEO of the UNSW's Energy Institute, and we're talking about how consumer energy resources can be integrated into the grid. Can I just go back to that issue of trust a little bit more? Who should be really trying to get consumers on board? Should it be the retailers? Should it be government? Who do you think is best placed to really be educating consumers about this?
It's a really interesting question because I think there are multiple facets to the answer. There's the question about who maybe should be offering the product versus who is providing the information. The reason I split those two is because on the former side, when you're thinking about who should be offering the product, I think the question that underpins that really is, what are you trying to achieve? And at the end of the day, you're trying to achieve value for customers. I think there's an important agency piece there, so delivering agency or choice there, and that can come in opt-in and opt-out clauses or products. And you're also, I think, needing to think about transparency. All of those aspects build trust. If you can show value, you can ensure that there's a level of agency and you are transparent with what's happening. That's a trust building exercise, and that's absolutely what we want to do. The second part of, I think, what you were talking about, which is who might be delivering those messages, it's really interesting because a lot of the conversations are not necessarily happening with the provider of that product. They're actually happening with, say, the person who's installing the device or the asset.
Yes.
So there is a crucial part that we have found through our research over the years about providing the resources, information resources, but also the training for installing, but also maintaining those assets from those for those people who are meeting the customers where they are at the point of installation.
Yes, no, it's very important. What about the issue, though, because it's a legitimate fear of a lot of consumers, and that is cybersecurity breaches. If we've got all of these assets of ours talking to each other and talking to networks and retailers, and there was a breach,
Obviously, a lot of personal information is going to be lost. It is a legitimate concern that, needs to be alleviated for consumers to join orchestration, aggregation, VPPs.
Mm, absolutely. So when we're thinking of these stages of the life cycle that I was talking about, those customer-facing stages also need to deeply consider customer protections. And in my experience, that is very front of mind for those energy sector stakeholders, particularly those that do have access to customer data. So this is something that we are considering in many ways, not just when it comes to, say, developing a value proposition, but also when it comes to standards development or even the development of a register of all of the resources that are connected in this way. I think you raise good points around cybersecurity as well, and this is an evolving space that we need to keep on top of. And I believe that all this energy sector stakeholders are alive to this issue and continue to invest in this space.
Are there examples from other countries where there are good interoperability standards that have made a really measurable difference for consumers?
As I see it, there are examples of these standards being developed overseas, but we always need to be mindful of our local context. So, we have our own market, we have our own rules, and we have our own unique grid, even when you think about it in a global context. Um, so it is good to refer to those standards, and there are many that are being developed overseas, but they need to be translated into our context, and that's the work that's currently underway. We can't rely on that work, but we can refer to it as we develop our own local standards as it relates to interoperability, but also other areas.
But in terms of just how it's done, just overall, is there any best practice?
Mm. There are some examples of that. For instance, in the US, there is progress, but also I would just be mindful of taking those as they are when we're coming here. But I am, I am fully appreciative that the work that's been happening through, say, that Smart Connect initiative that I mentioned earlier, funded by ARENA, has been looking very closely at those standards overseas. It is interesting in our space, though, when it comes to consumer-owned assets, that we are actually at the forefront of many of the applications
right.
of these standards, because our level of penetration of consumer-owned assets is so much higher than other jurisdictions.
Yes.
So, I think it's safe to say that the whole world is looking over
At
to
us.
when they see South Australia being completely powered by rooftop solar. That I think it's something that hasn't been done before in other jurisdictions, and so in many ways, we're at the leading edge. I guess we've just got to make sure we're not at the bleeding edge by doing all of this work to keep up and make sure that it's done in a way that doesn't compromise any of the systems we have in place.
So, in terms of what you'd like to see happen in the next, let's say, 12 months, what would make you feel like we had really made progress? Let's start with interoperability.
Mm. If I were to start there, I've just seen the Smart Connect initiative come to a close with a view to starting the next version of what's called the Distributed Energy Integration Program. I would love to see momentum building towards that, but considering both of the major contexts that we have here in Australia, with Western Australia alongside our national electricity market. Beyond that, I think I would love to see more investment going into the social research side, because I do think this space is evolving as more customers buy more assets. This rapid uptake of cheaper home batteries is a huge opportunity for us to engage with people who have literally invested in the energy transformation. And it is different to rooftop solar because you can't easily trade your one-way flow of solar into the grid, but batteries go both ways. So I would love to see more social science research funded so we can better understand, like you were saying, the motivations of the people who are purchasing those assets so that the system can benefit more from those investments.
Just going back on the issue about why interoperability might be a problem, and this is specifically in relation to batteries. I spoke to Simon Hackett, a tech entrepreneur, a few weeks ago, who argues that many households are unknowingly buying batteries that are effectively locked into a single manufacturer's software. And this it goes back to your argument that it limits their choice of other consumer energy devices and retailers. Every battery has its own ecosystem. But how do you think we should balance the tension between, these commercial interests and the push that he's got for open standards when it comes to the software? Because he believes that what we should be doing is actually tying the cheaper home battery scheme, that if you're going to get a rebate from the government, this should be open source software.
Yeah, I have to say, when I have considered the opportunity that exists with the cheaper home battery scheme, I've been more focused on how all Australians can benefit from this huge investment in essentially what is energy storage that can help us integrate more renewable energy on our grid as a whole. And my focus that is really in understanding how we can better incentivize the participation of those assets in a way that benefits customers, given, as you say, the significant public investment that's gone into this space. Now, I'm not necessarily an advocate for mandates. I do, again, support the social science that I believe is crucial to understand how we can make this attractive for people so we don't need to push them into it. But I would say that, different products, as long as they're able to respond in such a way that delivers that value to all Australians, I think that's the principle that I would uphold.
Wouldn't open source software make that more possible, though? Rather than the cheaper home batteries scheme being tied to people being able to putting in a battery that has VPP capability, but that VPP capability is really being able to connect to a VPP. What Simon is arguing is that every battery should be open to any VPP. So it's a difference.
I suppose that goes back to those principles that I was talking about when it comes to, say, delivering value for customers alongside giving them agency, and there's a part of that which is related to choice, but also transparency. So if you can get a really good deal, but you're going to be locked in to this for a long time, I would say at that principles level, it's the transparency to know that you won't have access into the future to other choices. As long as I think as we're upholding those principles, that is the crucial part. But when it comes to interoperability and what we were talking about earlier about being able to have all of those assets engaging with all of our networks, essentially, I do think that is a crucial part of those two goals that I mentioned earlier, essentially increasing customer choice as well as lowering costs for all customers as well.
Just a final question, Dani. Given the government's climate targets are increasingly relying on consumers producing energy that the grid can access, if we don't get this interoperability issue sorted, what do you think will be the consequences?
I suppose if we don't have that level of interoperability, what we'll be faced with is a steeper mountain to climb. We have to invest in more to be able to get the same outcome. Essentially, if we use batteries as an example, we need to invest in more batteries to be able to get the same level of storage that we need. It may take longer and it may cost more. So that's what I'm alive to. That's what I always think about when it comes down to this, is that we do have, as you say, a pretty ambitious target that we need to meet to avoid a pretty catastrophic consequence as we're faced with when it comes to climate change. But also, we do need to find viable pathways forward that may come in different forms. We need to consider, yes, the consumer side and these assets that are being invested in at the small scale, but we also need to complement that with the significant utility scale investments that we also know that we need. And that's related to renewable energy, storage, but also other enabling infrastructure as well, like the network.
Dani Alexander, thank you for joining the Switched On podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
And Dani Alexander is the CEO of the UNSW's Energy Institute. That's all we have time for today. Don't forget to like and follow Switched on your favourite podcast platform. And join me again for another conversation about the technologies, policies and people driving Australia's energy transition and what it means for households and communities. I'm Anne Delaney. See you then. Switched On Australia was proudly brought to you by GoodWe. GoodWe's all-in-one ESA home battery helps Australians store more of their own solar energy and rely less on the grid. With strong local support and technology already trusted in thousands of homes, GoodWe is making the switch to electrification simpler and more affordable. GoodWe is proud to work with Australian cricketer and GoodWe ambassador Alex Carey. Find out more at goodwe.com.au. Switched On Australia is also proudly brought to you by Boundless Earth. Boundless Earth uses philanthropy, investment and direct advocacy to help Australia become a global force in a decarbonised world.